Welcome everyone to the Preparing for an Annual Recertification training. I am Scott Cofoid, a Technical Coordinator with the Insurance Services Office, ISO, and the CRS program. This training will help you understand what a recertification is all about, taking you through the various steps of a recertification, and showing you helpful tips on how to prepare and submit one correctly. At the very end, I'll discuss a change we will have with the recertification process starting January 1, 2021. But no worries, everything I go over first will still be the case next year. There's just one addition. So I'll save it until the end so it doesn't confuse you as we go through this training. Communities that participate in the community rating system have exceptional floodplain management programs that earn premium discounts for flood insurance policyholders. Implementation of creditable activities is a worthwhile effort that makes communities safer from the risks of flooding. When your community joined CRS, you worked with your ISO CRS specialists to identify and document all the activities your community was doing to earn those credits. When your community joined CRS, you worked with your ISO CRS specialists to identify and document all the activities your community was doing to earn credits. In order to maintain those credits and the insurance discounts that come with them, your community must report regularly to CRS that you are still implementing all the same activities. You will do this every 3 or 5 years with a cycle verification, and annually in the years between with the recertification. An annual recertification is different than a cycle verification. A cycle verification is a full verification of every activity your community is doing. It involves a visit to your community and a review of all documentation needed for your CRS program. This is done every 3 to 5 years, depending on your class and total insurance discount. Annual recertification is a yearly check-in to confirm that you are continuing outreach, publicizing services, preparing progress reports for plans, and still doing maintenance on your drainage system between cycles. Recertifications require much less documentation than cycle verifications do. Annual recertification only requires documentation over the period of time since your last recertification or cycle verification, whichever came last. In either case, it's usually about a year. We'll call this your reporting period. Between cycles, you may also do a modification to improve your CRS class. If you do a modification in a given year, you are still required to do the annual recertification that year. Like I just mentioned, your recertification is the annual check of your activities. It also helps keep contact information current. Communities may have a new CRS coordinator, or CRS may assign a new specialist for your community. You don't have to wait to update CRS, but your recertification is another reminder and opportunity to keep us up to date if there's been changes in your community. Recertification is also a great opportunity for new CRS coordinators to understand what activities their communities do in the program. Many times, new CRS coordinators do not fully understand the CRS and don't know what documentation to provide. Annual recertification gives new CRS coordinators a chance to talk to someone and see the list of activities that their community is getting credit for. Our CRS specialists are busy throughout the year preparing for and conducting cycle verifications, attending state conferences, local workshops, and local user group meetings. So we have a dedicated team of resource specialists to help you through the annual recertification process. Resource specialists are trained to perform thorough and consistent reviews of recertifications and elevation certificates each year. When it's time for you to recertify, you will get an email from a resource specialist with their contact information and your recertification packet at least 45 days before your recertification date. For example, if your recertification date is August 1st each year, you will receive your recertification packet 45 days ahead of time, usually around June 15th. The resource specialist will be reviewing your documentation as well as any ECs you submit with it. They will also keep your regular CRS specialist notified of important correspondence as well as the final finding. Your community's annual recertification due date is determined by your state. With our new central review process, we have 3 resource specialists that share the recertification workload. The schedule is divided by geographic area and into 4 quarters of the year. You can find this nationwide schedule at our website, crsresources.org, under the 200 Series tab. Be sure you know when your recertification date is so you can be prepared for it. Here's another look at how recertifications are spread around the country. Find your state and the color of it, Then look at the legend in the bottom right corner to identify which quarter you recertify. And because of the large number of CRS communities in Florida, Florida is the only state that covers 2 different recert dates. You can see that Miami-Dade and Monroe counties recertify in a different quarter than the rest of the state does. If you forget your recertification date, don't worry, ISO remembers. Your resource specialist will be sending your recert packet 45 days ahead of time. Your packet will consist of the CC 213 form for your CEO to sign, the program data table for you to update, and the list of activities that you are currently getting credit for. This list serves to notify you what documentation you'll need to submit with the packet. There are 3 situations when an annual recertification is not required. A recertification can be deferred if you are currently in the middle of a cycle verification, if you are scheduled to cycle in the same year, or if you've recently been impacted by a major flood event or other disaster. Let me give you an example of the situation in number 2, where you are cycling later in the year. Let's say you're a community in Florida due to be recertified by May 1. However, early in the year, you're contacted by your CRS specialist and told that this is your cycle year, and you and your CRS specialist have a date to meet for the cycle in September. You will not be asked to recertify in May that year. You will only cycle that year in September. The first item you'll receive in your recertification packet is Form CC 213-1. This form lists the contact information for the CEO and the CRS coordinator for each community. We ask that you review this form carefully and update any contact information that needs it, and have your CEO sign and date the bottom of the form. Your CEO is attesting to the fact that you are still in compliance with the minimum NFIP standards, that you still maintain ECs, that you have reviewed your rep loss list in areas, that you've sent your rep loss outreach, that you are still earning credit under 510 if you're a rep loss category C community, and that you are maintaining flood insurance on all buildings owned by your community in the SFHA. Know that self-insurance qualifies for that. This form must be filled out, signed, and dated by your CEO and returned in order to stay in the CRS program. The second page of the CC 213 form is the program data table. Here we ask you to update the number of buildings in your floodplain and the area of your floodplain, in case either have changed from the previous cycle verification or your last recertification. You should read the instructions that come with the form. We need all of column A filled out for lines 1 through 13, and column B should only be completed if you have a regulated floodplain and it applies to your community. Column C is optional, but it's good information to have. You are also required to fill out all fields in lines 14 through 16. If you have data for lines 17 through 19, you could add it, but it's not required. This form must be filled out completely and accurately, at least column A, lines 1 through 16. Failure to do so with this form jeopardizes your participation in the program. Activity statements are usually 2 to 3 pages, where we ask you to place your initials on the line next to the activities you are still implementing. We will assume that any lines left blank mean that you are not implementing those activities anymore, and the points for those activities will be taken away. This may result in the loss of a class, so be very careful with initialing these activities. Do not place an X or a check mark on the line. We need to see your initials. Anything else will be returned to you. On the activity statement, we'll remind you that only those statements that contain the word attached in bold require that you submit documentation to us for that activity. Some communities still submit documentation for every activity. Please know that that is not required and causes you a lot of extra work. In addition to certifying that your community is still implementing each activity, the activity statements will guide you through a list of documentation that must be submitted with your recertification. So let's go through the activities that require documentation. First off, it's important to know that when attaching documentation, write the activity number clearly up at the top of the page. Most CRS communities keep a log of people who call or visit the counter asking for floodplain determination. This is the service that's creditable on Activity 320. So you'll want to write 320 on the top of the document. Also place your activities in the order they come in the program, like 310, 320, 330, and so on. This helps keep things organized as well. Digital copies of your documentation are highly preferred. If you have to mail something, don't send it signature required. We'll confirm receipt of your materials via email. For Activity 310, if you had any new construction or substantial improvement in the SFHA since your last recertification or cycle verification, you'll need to provide that permit list, ECs, and all other required certifications like floodproofing certificates, V-zone design certificates, and engineered opening certificates since your last submittal. Your resource specialist will review them and provide feedback if there are errors or missing information. More training on ECs is available on our website. Activity 320 requires you to submit a copy of your publicity for the map information service you provide along with the log or letter documenting you are continuing to provide the service. These are the same items required during your cycle verification. For Activity 330, if you are receiving credit for a program for public information, a PPI, you'll need to prepare an annual evaluation. Your resource specialist will send a progress report template that will guide you through the required information needed. Like Activity 320, Activity 360 credits a service you provide and requires a copy of the publicity for property protection service you provided during the year, along with a log or letter documenting that service. Activity 370 requires that you prepare an annual evaluation of your flood insurance coverage improvement plan and document that it was submitted to your governing body. No action is required by the governing body. We just want you to show your governing body your annual report. Activity 370 also requires a copy of all outreach projects to promote flood insurance during the year. If you're receiving credit for providing technical assistance in your office for flood insurance, you'll need to submit a copy of the outreach publicizing that service as well. Throughout the entire 400 series, the only time you'll need to submit anything is if you've amended an ordinance that you are receiving credit for. In this case, if you amended anything that affects CRS credit, like in Activities 430 for your floodplain development ordinance or in 450 for your stormwater regulations, please provide a copy and clearly mark the sections that were amended so your resource specialist can easily find it. For 500 series activities, we'll begin with rep loss requirements. If you have repetitive loss properties, you are required to distribute an annual outreach letter to your repetitive loss areas. Submit a copy of that outreach with your recertification. If you have credit for a floodplain management plan or rep loss area analysis, we'll need to see your annual progress report for each one. And just like Activity 330 PPI, your resource specialist will send you a progress report template to help you. The key parts of a progress report are a description of how the evaluation report was prepared and how it was made available to your governing body, how the report is distributed, and a status of each action item in the plan. You may need to work with the plan leader for this information. The progress report will also need to explain why any action items or objectives in the plan were not met yet. And finally, the report should include any revised or new project recommendations. If you are part of a regional or countywide hazard mitigation plan, check with the regional plan leader to see if the annual progress report has already been prepared for everyone participating in the plan, or if you'll need to do one yourself. This part of your annual recertification has significant consequences if not done properly. Failure to do the outreach letter if you have rep loss areas will result in removal from the program, since this is a Class 9 prerequisite. Failure to do the annual progress report will result in loss of your points for your floodplain management plan. And if you are a Category C rep loss community, failure to do the plan's progress report will result in removal from the program, since this is also a Class 9 prerequisite as well. Activity 540, Drainage System Maintenance, has several elements that require documentation. Channel and debris removal, CDR, requires a copy of one typical inspection report that shows maintenance was performed on the credited part of your drainage system. The same thing applies for storage basin maintenance credit. Reports should include the date that the work was done, the name of the person who did it, and the work that was performed. For Activity 540 stream dumping regulations, you'll need to submit an example of the outreach project you used to publicize those regulations. Activity 610 credits flood warning and response plans. As with other plans in CRS, you are required to prepare an annual progress report, or in this case, what's referred to as an after-action report. If you had a flood over the past year that triggered your flood warning and response plan, you'll need to sit down with all involved and evaluate how your plan worked, what needs improvement, and recommendations for changes. If you didn't have a flood event over the past year, you still need to do an annual exercise practicing your plan. In either case, you'll need to provide documentation explaining the actual event itself, or how the exercise was conducted, when it happened, what part of the community it affected, what the extent of flooding was, lessons learned, and the recommendations for improvement. These after-action reports need to be submitted with your annual recertification. You are also required to submit a copy of your annual outreach to residents, informing them how they'll be warned and what safety measures they should take in case of a flood event. Activities 620 and 630 are for levees and dams. They are credited much less often in CRS, but still important to mention. For Activity 620 and levees, you'll need to provide your inspection records, verify the fact that your warning equipment has been tested, and submit a copy of the annual outreach that's required to inform residents that they are at risk from a levee failure, and in the event of a levee failure, know how to protect themselves from flooding. And just like Activity 610, an after-action report is required to show lessons learned and recommended changes to your system from an actual event or the planned exercise. Activity 630 for dams works exactly the same way. The same information that was just mentioned for levees is also required if you're getting credit for having a dam failure plan. Here are some helpful tips and reminders on how to submit a successful recertification. The most important thing you can do is something you should be doing throughout the year. Keep your CRS specialist updated with your current contact information, especially your email address when anything changes in your community. If we can't get a hold of you and you don't submit your recertification on time, your community risks losing a CRS classification and the insurance discount for your residents. Know your recertification due date and when you will be receiving your notice. Go to that table on our website that shows when your state is due, and know that usually 45 days ahead of that due date, you'll receive your packet. If you don't receive it at that time, then make sure you contact your resource specialist and ask the status of it. Don't wait for your annual recertification to implement or document your activities. You should have processes and schedules in place to perform and document activities throughout the year. Keep a copy of your required outreach, publicity, inspection records, and progress reports in one place as you go along, and then be ready to submit those documents digitally as soon as you get your recertification notice. 45 days should be plenty of time to assemble the required documentation if the work was already done. Keep copies of everything you submit, just in case something happens and we either don't receive it or something gets corrupted on our end. Only submit documentation that is required by each activity statement. Look for the words attached is or attached are in those statements, and don't send documentation for every element. Mark up or somehow identify all documentation you are submitting so that we know what activity it's for. The documentation may seem obvious to you, but please write the activity number or element on the top of the relevant pages so there's no confusion and you get credit for everything you submit. If you have implemented new activities in the anticipation of improving the class, talk about this with your CRS specialist directly. That documentation should be submitted directly to your CRS specialist and not part of your recertification. If your recertification is not submitted by your due date or missing the required documentation, you will lose the points and possibly a class or two. If you do not sign the CC-213 page, submit the program data table, or fail to submit what's required for the Class 9 prerequisites, your resource specialist will recommend to FEMA that you be removed from the program. Okay, as promised, back at the beginning of this training, I said we'll have some changes to the recertification process starting in 2021. The big change, as it relates strictly to recertifications, is the fact that ECs will now be required each year on your recertification date and will no longer be scored as part of your cycle verification. The 90% threshold for correction is still required, but now we will evaluate that yearly at your recertification time as part of the increased Class 9 prerequisite. And the main thing to remember is that permit list and ECs will be required every year on your recertification date, starting in 2021. Even if you recently submitted ECs as part of a cycle verification that started in 2020, or if you have a cycle scheduled for any time during 2021. For a more detailed look at how this will work, be sure to catch our Class 9 and Activity 310 changes training video on our website. As always, if you have any questions about the annual recertification process, please reach out to your resource specialist. Their contact information is available on our website, crsresources.org, under the 100 Series tab. Thank you for watching. Continue to watch our website for additional training videos that may be of interest to you.